Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We will start in a few minutes. Just a quick reminder, we appreciate your feedback, so please don't forget to rate this talk at the end. Let's welcome our speaker, Christopher Connelly from North Carolina State University. Please enjoy the talk.
All right, how's it going, guys? My name is Chris Connelly. So I gave a talk a little bit earlier today about how we are collecting data with our sports at NC State and how we're trying to kind of collect that data into one place using HPCC Systems from LexisNexis and trying to use that to gain information based on our data to help coaches and us understand kind of the normal stresses that our athletes have and how we can help them kind of prepare and be ready to perform at their best. So this talk is going to be a little bit more of a kind of dive and detailed view into how we actually use HPCC systems and how our system is run. So just a couple slides repeated from earlier just to kind of go over the system itself, and for anybody that may not have been in that talk. We're trying to build an athlete management system that can bring our data sources into one place and kind of do one big analysis, create one giant puzzle with all the different pieces from the different data sources to create one story that can help us understand kind of what is happening with our athletes, what may be affecting their ability to perform, so that we can try and understand it as well as possible so that we can help them as much as we can to kind of reach that peak performance. So these are kind of like the four main pieces that go into it, including a fifth one that is then when we kind of bring our analytics into it once our data is in place and kind of been processed the way we want to. And the ultimate goal is to kind of be able to help the coaches get what they need, but then also then be able to use that to help the athletes. So we use GPS devices with the soccer team, which is kind of what this is going to focus mostly on, our men's soccer program. So what data are we getting from these GPS devices? What can we learn from this data about what they do on the field every day when they perform their sport? How can we use this to help improve the kind of training prescription that we give to them? How we help them try and work to perform or to improve their performance for their sport, and how we can kind of understand the best way we possibly can just kind of the daily stresses and the daily physical loads that are on these athletes just from, everyday living as a student athlete. And then just kind of a quick view of our data sources. We have plenty, but today we'll be a little bit focused on the questionnaire data as well as GPS data coming in. So we have a readiness questionnaire, which falls under our readiness data, which is really a measure of kind of their more of like a day-to-day view, trend over time, look at kind of their fatigue, soreness, just kind of quality of their feel for that moment in time, so we can understand how they're feeling right now, how that compares to normal, and how that may be relative to their training and moving forward, being prepared for games. And then on the training load side, we have our training load questionnaire, which gives us the idea of how hard they felt a specific training session was, whether it was a game, whether it was training on the field or in the gym. And then obviously the GPS data that gives us the kind of objective measures of on the field physical loads, whether it's training or a game. So we're trying to build a system here that can bring our data into one place. We can upload that all to the HPCC Systems server that we're working on, and then be able to, once it's there, clean and process the data to then have it be prepared for what we want to do with it to obtain whatever information we're looking for, and then be able to then use that data to create whatever visualizations and reports that we're going to make for ourselves and show to the coaches. And then just a quick view of some of the stuff we're looking at today. On the left, that's all the files that would be coming from men's and women's soccer if we were to be using the whole system. And then today we're just kind of looking at a quick view of the men's side, and then specifically GPS, raw GPS. And then at the bottom is kind of the athlete info file. So I'll give you a look at that in a little bit, but just for now, now our quick look is going to start looking at some of how we build out some of these scripts for the programming in the system. But just a quick look, kind of a first step here that we will go with is we have some scheduled tasks based on some of these scripts that we've set up. So just up here, we have our 2 scheduled tasks set up. So these are just kind of automatically running some of the scripts that we've made to get some of these steps of the process in line. So here's scheduled tasks, upload all of our data, and here's a scheduled task to kind of run some of our processing within the server. So once we have kind of that set up, it's kind of automating some of our process for how we want some of this to go down. But essentially, for the way that all of this works, hold on, this is in the way for me. Okay, so on our side panel here, we have kind of all the files that fall into our repository for this here. We have our layouts for the data. So when our data gets sprayed into the cluster here, we're kind of showing each file that's coming in. We have different layouts for each one. So when we look at this here, it's kind of showing when we send the data in to the landing zone, which is kind of where it sits before it gets put into the server, we're trying to tell it, all right, what day file are we looking at? Because each day we're uploading, so find the folder for today, find all the files from today, and then search for the names of these files and make sure they kind of fall in line with the files that we're looking for. Some specific files, such as our raw GPS, does not look as well labeled. So a lot of these will come in with names that we're expecting. But for example, if we look at here, this is more of a raw GPS file where it has names. It's just kind of explaining a little bit of the file, but we don't know exactly what it is if you've never seen it before. So part of the processing through this program here is to figure out, all right, if we find a file like that, and we know that we need the raw GPS file, look for something with a name similar to that, and then we can figure out, all right, this is the raw GPS file, and then we'll know where to put it, how to process it and everything. And then we have a staging process for each of these things, which is similar to kind of the next step after the processing, giving it a new layout with how we want the data to be before we are about to do any manipulations or aggregations or anything like that. So just to give you a quick idea here, we have just a quick view here of kind of a layout for a specific file. So this is for our GPS data, all the different variables into their own fields with the right data type and everything ready for processing. So once we go from there, telling it everything we need, we send it the program that then processes that data. And then now we have here, we're going in, we're telling it, all right, this is what we want to do with each of these fields, how we want to process it to make sure it's ready to go once we need to do any manipulation in the future. And then here, we're going to be layering on some other information such as the info from the athlete info file. So we'll dedupe all the records and we'll make sure that we can connect everything like athlete ID so that we can start using things such as that instead of their names on everything. So if we go back to here, we have our athlete info file and that will have everything in it such as ID numbers, names, sport, position, all that stuff, so that we can add context to all of our files. And then here we have dates from the whole season, including what we call like a game day count. So from here we can see what the game day count for each day is. So a GD would be a game day. GD +1, GD -6 would be that it's one day after a game and it's 6 days until the next game. So one thing in the soccer world is that they like to use that as context to explain the type of day, because a lot of times, you know, if we have a game day -2, then normally game day -2s will look pretty similar in how those sessions are panned out. So we can understand, all right, well, today should be pretty similar to the last game day -2, and we can start to compare different days together to understand if things are going the way we want it to be, if everything is happening the way it's supposed to, or if it isn't, then we try and figure out why. So we have our different pieces here that help us go through and be able to process these things, and we're running all of our staging processes for all our different files. And then we have our different files that are to actually do our manipulation. So here, this is the script that runs them all, but if we go into here and we look at these separate files, one, for example, is kind of a breakdown for different sections of a game. So what we're doing going through here is we're finding just the days in the data that are games, and we're trying to connect our summary GPS data with our raw GPS data so we know what day is a game, and then know that these are the only the drill periods or kind of different things that can happen in that session. So we're trying to filter to just those drills or time periods. And then we're going in and trying to split each part of that game into 15-minute segments. So each half of a soccer game is generally 45 minutes with some extra time for stoppage, injuries, anything like that. So usually there's a little bit of spillover. So normally when we run this, we'll see kind of 3 buckets of time for each half with a fourth of just kind of extra spillover time. And then just in case if there's any overtimes for that game, we split that time up as well. But we'll go through, we'll kind of join our data together based on drill time periods and date and athlete ID, all that stuff, and then be able to figure out, all right, once we have everything kind of joined together the way we'd like it, then we can go in and actually start to find out, all right, let's make our window of 15 minutes, go through for each game, separate those 15-minute periods, and then be able to get our average speeds and distances covered during those pieces of time so that then we can go through and be able to look at the data from a different lens. So once we go from here, then that's when we kind of have all of our chart stuff done. We can also despray the data. So that one scheduled task was really this one here, where we have all those other kind of overhanging scripts being run in this one script here, where each day, once we have our automatic upload of our data, it'll run this script to automatically do all of our other steps of this processing and kind of setting up the data to run through those charts so that for that day, we can be able to have all the data kind of ready to go once it's been uploaded into the system. Then we know that data can then be processed and then be ready to be put through whatever reporting methods we're going to be using to get that into kind of a digestible form for us and the coaches to be able to understand what we're going to be able to get out of that data. So then just as another quick view, once we got through that process, the next step was to be able to upload that to a place where we can then get it into some tables and then be able to get it into some place where we could visualize it. So here we have, we were using a thing called ClickHouse that was a way to kind of set our data into tables so that we could then query that data to a place called, there was a thing on ClickHouse where we then queried the data into a place where we could visualize it. So right here we have our different tables for our different charts that we just built. So for instance, we had the game report. So that's this one here. We have men's and women's charts being turned into tables here. So we're just taking that data again and then being able to lay it out with all the data types for ClickHouse, where we then would kind of get that data ready to be able to be queried out to where we were visualizing the data. So then from there, let me go back into the slides here. We could start to build out some of these visualizations where now as we looked at that game report, we were splitting things up for each game. This is a view for each part of a game being kind of each drill of that game being split out, and then looking at each game from the season. So this is one season's worth of games. Right now it's not bucketed out by time, but we can see the distance for the first half, second half, and any overtimes for each game, being able to compare between games, compare between halves, and then here being able to look at those buckets of time for a specific game and specific half of that game for each athlete. So each color here is a different athlete, and each number at the bottom is a different section of that second half. So 1 would be the first 15 minutes, 2, second 15 minutes, 3, third 15 minutes, and 4th with any extra time. So from there, now we can see the comparison between players for each section of that second half. So we can see, is someone kind of maintaining their work rate? Is someone increasing their work rate? Or kind of maybe they're going downhill, they went a little too hard early on, or we can check into any of those types of things that the coaches may be interested in. And then also here, looking at kind of a athlete compared to team view for each section of a game. So this is one game, first and second half, with the different time buckets. So now we can see how that athlete stacks up compared to the team average for this game. And as we can see from this view, in general, they were normally above average for each time bucket, especially during the second 15 minutes of the second half. They tend to be doing a fair amount more distance than the rest of the team on average. So that's just kind of a quick view to kind of understand how we were trying to build some of that data out, and then how we were trying to make sense of it and be able to show it to our coaches. And then from there, some of the more recent stuff was being able to use some of the built-in machine learning libraries within HPCC Systems. So just as a quick view for some of this was our script to run through to do our learning tree model to be able to look at the relationship between our GPS data and our subjective questionnaire data. So we're trying to see what variables were going to have a big impact to run through the model and have a good enough connection to try and predict the next day how they would respond on their readiness questionnaires. So here we're just trying to run through the model with whatever variables we're going to find that are going to have the greatest impact on how we can try and predict, and then see how that actually runs through and predicts the outcomes for the next day for that readiness questionnaire. And then we also have some programs over here for our cluster analysis, where we ran through to try and kind of group up our data based on the different variables from the GPS data, see which ones are similar enough that we start seeing those clusters being built, just to check to see what variables are kind of really interrelated that we may not want to run together in a model, or which ones seem to be kind of the main ones that tend to be the best kind of measures for certain characteristics of what they're doing on the field, whether it be volume or be able to see what's happening there. And then, so this is a quick view of the ECL watch. So this is where we can kind of check on everything that once we've run those programs. So this is kind of a web interface to look at when we actually run these programs, what the data looks like, check to make sure everything is working correctly. So we can go through, if we run our model for the learning tree, we can see our outputs. We can see here, we can get our R-squared values, our mean square error, root mean square error, trying to see if things are in line with what we're looking for, and then see the importance of each factor that's being run through. So we can see here that the first one was athlete ID. which one had the biggest effect. And then we have here, which was our impacts, here being our distance metric, our distance per minute, and then our time above 85% heart rate. So that's giving us kind of an understanding of how that model is running. We haven't really built out the visualizations for that sort of stuff yet, but that is kind of how we kind of use their system to be able to kind of run some checks and balances. But again, really trying to use these things to, again, just inform our process and hopefully drive some discussion to make better decisions around how we can understand the stresses on the athlete and how we can help use this information to improve our process and how we train athletes and kind of build out a year so that when we know they need to be performing at their best, we can make sure that they're ready to do so. So let me take a look at some of the questions here. So there were some people were saying they were missing some of the slides. I'm not sure which part they were missing, but there was only slides for some of the visualizations here. Otherwise, it was some of the stuff on the actual screen. Is there an option to use data like this for online fitness training programs? So there's definitely some things out there that can be able to do this sort of stuff. Some platforms out there for people that may be tracking like endurance training metrics. So if you're someone who does cycling, running, triathlon, stuff like that, there's platforms out there that definitely could give you this type of reporting. And I mean, a lot of the stuff within what we've used through LexisNexis and HPCC, it's all part of an open source platform. So there's definitely plenty of people out there developing all different types of pieces. So there's definitely plenty of ways you can try and take that sort of approach for that sort of thing. I know there's some platforms out there such as like Training Peaks or possibly even Strava has some support for that sort of stuff. And then for any type of kind of group fitness stuff, I think you could possibly track some heart rate type data if you're kind of tracking that over time and have that information for different workouts and whatnot. But in terms of what we were doing with this, I think that's definitely something that could be built out. Just with our case with team sports, the difference is that what we're going to be looking at and what may be valuable to look at for athlete performance is going to be a little bit different just because of the difference between something like soccer compared to either an endurance sport or someone working out just kind of for general fitness. So it would be then just kind of reframing for what you're trying to make sense of and use the data to inform on. But I think that's probably it. I don't think there's any other questions here, but thank you for sticking around for the talk. I hope you were able to get enough out to kind of understand how the system was built and works and get an idea of how we kind of try and run our process to be able to make sense of our data, kind of bring it in and try and use it to, help us to the best of our abilities, be able to help our athletes perform to their best.
Christopher, thank you very much for being today with us and for your amazing talk. We are grateful to those who have attended this session and will provide the survey at the end. Enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys too.